Bonjour, mes amis. Welcome and good day. This is Brooke Spence coming to you from Canadian National Headquarters in Montreal and the office of Paul Tellier. Paul's the former CEO of Canadian National and the leader of the largest privatization in Canadian history. And I wonder, before we get started, if you would comment on the lapel pin, because I think that's an important thing that might be overlooked by those in the States.
In the year of the centennial of Canada in 1967, the Order of Canada was established to recognize the contribution of Canadians at one of any three levels, at the local, regional level, at the provincial level, and at the federal, national, international level. The selection committee is chaired by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada. It's totally non-political, and there are three levels of honorees and so on. The highest level is Companion of the Order of Canada, and the Statute of the Order of Canada limit the number of people, living at that level, about 125. And they come from all walks of life, artists, politicians, business people. Railroaders, of course, and university people, and so on.
It's quite an honor, and so I did want to call that out. So as is our custom, we start at the beginning. And so we'd like to delve into your family life, starting where you were born, where you grew up, how that all transpired. If you would take us through that, that would be great.
Well, let me start by saying that I was very fortunate. I was very privileged. I don't remember any bad memories of my youth. None whatsoever. I had wonderful parents. I had 3 sisters, 2 brothers. We got along extremely well, and was brought up in a small town, Joliette, about 40-45 miles east of Montreal, which is a town today of about 25,000 people. And my father was a lawyer, my grandfather was a lawyer, and I was educated first in Joliette. Then the school thanked me for my services, and I was terminated, and I had to move to a school in Montreal, and I was there for a couple of years, and unfortunately, I was working with a student nurse, who had to work at night. So I ended up, seeing her in daytime. It was very difficult to make this compatible with my lecture schedule, my classes schedule. And I happened to fail a year, and Dad decided to put me in a boarding school.
So the heart won out over the academic necessities.
Yes, it did. And then I said, well, I'm not going back to that boarding school, and I decided to start working during the Christmas break as a ski patrol. And Dad found out that in January that I was not back in school, and we had a very long, serious conversation on the phone, and he convinced me, to go back to school, and then I went on and completed my Bachelor of Arts degree. I took a degree at University of Ottawa in law, came back to Quebec, I was admitted to the bar, and then I came to the conclusion that I didn't want to practice as a lawyer. So I went to Oxford for 3 years, where I took what they call a BLit, which is a research degree, and the equivalent of a master in public administration. Came back and started teaching at the University of Montreal. I thought I was going to be there for many years. I was teaching constitutional law. I got an offer to become the executive assistant of a senior minister, the Minister of Energy, Mines, and Resources in Ottawa. I accepted this offer. And I ended up in Ottawa for 22 years, whereas I was planning to be there only for a year.
Can you comment on how you got selected? Because here you are teaching in Montreal, and then all of a sudden this offer comes up. How did that originate?
Well, at the University of Ottawa, I had come across that teacher who was then in politics, and he was a senior minister. But I didn't know him personally, but he thought that to bring somebody like me who was teaching constitutional law, who had no political background, to help him discharge the responsibilities as cabinet minister, would be a good move. And some of his colleagues, knew me and so on. And therefore, I accepted the job for a year, and then I got various promotions, not on the political side, but on the professional side of the government. And I ran a couple of government departments, and then I got into the top job.
And you had gotten married before you started teaching?
Yeah, I got married right after my BA. So 20 years of age, and it has been the best decision of my life, the very best decision of my life.
Bigger even than privatizing CN.
Oh, yes. And she has been involved. She has been following. She has been, I've always, my style, I've always been to share a lot with my wife. And in stressful moments, when I would feel the stress, I would phone her up and I would say, forget about dinner tonight, and at home, we're going out. And then would always go to a very a small restaurant, very quiet. And then I would just share my frustration, my stress with her. And she would react. And she was a very serious advisor. One day, I started that conversation by saying, my God, I find it difficult. We have to abolish another 250 jobs and so on. And started to complain about this. And I spoke about this. And at one point in time, she said, can we talk about something else? There is something I don't understand. You have abolished something like 5,000 jobs, and now, you're crying about 250 and so on. I understand that you take this very seriously, but can we move to something else? And then it gives you a sense of perspective. She was perfectly right. It was the right decision to do. We're treating our people well and so on. But she was giving me that sense of perspective. So throughout my career, she was a very close advisor, a very close. And the more stressed I was, the closer it would get.
She was a balancing act.
Yeah, and tremendous judgment, every which way, about family matters, business matters, and so on. A very well-balanced human being.
So speaking of family, do you want to talk a little bit about the junior Telliers?
Yes. I've been very fortunate. I've got a daughter and a son. One is all social, the other one is all business. My daughter took a BA. She had discovered working, as a swimming instructor, that the best way to bring difficult kids into at the right place and to help them was sports. So she took her first degree in physical education, and then she said, well, maybe I should go into criminology. So she took a master in criminology, and she went to work with inmates in securities and maximum security penitentiaries. And then after many years there, she took a master in psychology. And now she is a practitioner as a psychotherapist, focusing on the people who have had a major trauma. Veterans, police officers, people, who had been victim of harassment, and so on and so forth. And my son, and she has one daughter, and my son is a business person, started very young as an executive in Bell Canada, one of the youngest vice presidents in the history of Bell Canada. 28, he was a vice president. Did very well. Then Yellow Pages used to belong to Bell Canada, and in certain part of the country, he took over. It was sold to KKR. KKR said, show us what you can do, and we'll decide if we keep you or not. He did perform, and therefore he ran Yellow Pages for a certain number of years. Yellow Pages in Canada were all split by province, so he consolidated Yellow Pages from coast to coast, and so on. Of course, the internet came into play, so the print started to go down, and the internet started, to get the upper end, and so on. He left Yellow Pages, became a partner, and then a senior partner at McKinsey, and recently went into a private equity firm in Montreal.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, and he's got three children.
So just backing up to your civil service time, you went there for a year and a half and stayed for 22. At what point did you say, I'm going to stay in this line of work, I'm not going to go do something else?
Well, my philosophy has always been, and this is the advice I give to young people, when you no longer learn, get out of the job. Move to something else.
Don't coast.
Exactly. And I was always presented with challenges, and therefore I was always learning. And the other important thing that extremely important to me is the people that you were working with. And I suppose that if I had some success, it's because I was always surrounded by people who were much better than I was. And my granddaughter, she was at university, one of my granddaughters told me, Viviane told me, Paul, if you're always the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. and therefore, I'm a strong believer. And if you look at the people that we brought in to privatize CN, these people could all run circles around me before breakfast in the morning. And I'm a strong believer in this.
Sure.
And this is what leadership is all about, is that you surround yourself with the best possible people and you give them the freedom to perform.
But you can only do that if you're not afraid that one of them is after your job, if you have enough self-confidence to say, you have to be self-confident, obviously, but yes. So Brian Mulroney is the PM at the time, and he came to you and said, how about CN? How did that transpire?
Basically, I decided at one point in time to move into the private sector. And given the fact that I had ran the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources as the Deputy Minister for 3 years, and prior to that, I'd been involved, in oil and gas exploration in the far north. I was quite interested in the oil and gas business. And there was a possibility of getting a job at Petro-Canada in Calgary. And the Prime Minister didn't want me to leave. And he said, why don't you stay another 6 months and so on. And difficult to say no, to the top person. And after a few months, the board of Canadian National decided that it was time to have a new CEO. And the chairman informed the prime minister that they were doing this. And the prime minister told me, would you be interested to do this? And I said, yes, Prime Minister, provided that you give me the mandate to privatize CN. And this was in the summer of 1992. So I moved to CN in October 1992, 1st of October. As a matter of fact, the 30th of September, because they were approving the budget. And I said, no way you're going to approve the budget without me being in the room. So therefore, I got in 1 day early to be there to discuss the budget the budget discussion. And then in June, Mr. Mulroney stepped down. I'd been at CN for 7 or 8 months. Mr. Mulroney stepped down as Prime Minister. As a result, there was an election, and there was a change of party. And Mr. Chrétien became the Prime Minister. I had to work with Mr. Chrétien because he was my minister when I was running the Department of Energy, Mines, and Resources. And he appointed, and that was very fortunate, an outstanding minister who had a background in business, and he wanted to get things done. And when he was given the mandate to privatize CN, because it was in the cards, but the new government had to approve the move, then it was possible, for us to move.
I don't want to go too far off track or out of order, but you spent a lot of time in the Northwest Territories earlier on, and I think that's worth getting your experience there and how that helped shape your career later on.
Yeah, between prime ministers, there was, between Mr. Mulroney and Mr. Chrétien, there were 2 prime ministers, and one of them was Mr. Clerk. And Mr. Clerk decided, I had spent a fair amount of time at the request of the Prime Minister. You will recall that there was a referendum in Quebec to debate whether Quebec should remain part of Canada. And the government needed a strategy to prepare to win that referendum. And Mr. Trudeau, not this one, but the father, asked me to put a team together to prepare and plan the strategy for the Quebec referendum to convince Quebecers that they should stay in Canada. And so I did that for a couple of years.
We might need you in Texas in the U.S.
I won't touch that one. And I did that for a couple of years. And of course, I was at the center of a major political and policy issue. So when Mr. Clerk came and there was a change of government, Mr. Clerk said, I hear that you're competent, but obviously I've got to move you to somewhere else. Where do you want to go? And I said, Mr. Clerk, and he was proposing to me the Department of the Environment. And I said, Prime Minister, if I had the choice, I would love to be responsible for the Department of Indian Affairs. That's the way it was called then. Today we talk about, Aboriginals. And in those days it was Indian Affairs. And Northern Development. And in those days, I'm talking 1979, most of the powers to run our 2 territories in the north, and now we have 3 territories, but in those days there were 2. It was on the west side of the country, Yukon, which is above north of British Columbia, and next to it, further east, the Northwest Territories, which was going all the way to Newfoundland, to Labrador. Later, that was divided in 2, but it was the Northwest Territories. And the reason I wanted to do this is that I had spent a fair amount of time, there was major activities of oil and gas exploration along the Mackenzie River, which flows into the Arctic Ocean, the Beaufort Sea. And spent a fair amount of time there. And I spent a fair amount of time visiting Aboriginal settlements, Inuit, north of 60, Indians south of 60. And I was very comfortable with these communities. So I decided to accept this assignment where I was for 3 years. And I felt that, a bunch of bureaucrats cannot decide how to help these people and prepare for the devolution of power to these 2 territorial governments, do that from Ottawa, 7 days a week. So therefore, it was part of my schedule regularly to get out of Ottawa, to be in the field, to visit Indian reserves. And these Indian reserves, there are some, there is one just outside of Montreal, but most of them, are very close to, the Arctic Circle and northern part of the provinces, large concentration, in the 4 western provinces, and so on. So I would spend a fair amount of time there, visiting these settlements, talking to the Indian chiefs, talking to the mayor of the Inuit settlements, and so on and so forth, to really relate to their housing problems and, social problems, dependence, on drugs and booze and so on and so forth. So, I had to get out of my office in Ottawa in order to do that. And it was a learning experience. And
So you're a white guy who speaks French, you're from the government, you're here to help. How were you received by the indigenous folks?
There were some rough moments. There were some very, very rough moments. It was an occupation one day of the office in Winnipeg by 28 chiefs of Indian bands and so on and so forth. They wanted to meet the minister. Minister said, "Paul, you go." And I got there, and the chief were all there, and they said, "We want to talk to you. We don't want these 2 guys next to you, to be there. So tell them to get out."
And who were those 2 guys?
Well, one was my assistant deputy minister of finance, and the other guy was the assistant deputy minister responsible for the programs.
Okay.
And I didn't know exactly how to react because, you're intimidated, and so on. And my chief of staff, was an Aboriginal. And he passed me a note and he tell him to buzz off. So I said to the leader, I said, "Listen, you want me to go back to Ottawa, catch the next plane? You're not going to decide who's going to be on my side in these discussions." So therefore, here you are. I thought I was going to meet with you. You have 25 of your colleagues with you. You're not going to decide on my side. But these are the kind of difficulties that you face because we have treated these people so badly. And I, for one, feel that Canada is a great country, but one of the few black eyes that we have internationally on our history is the way we have treated our Aboriginal people. And as a result, to deal with them, you have to be firm and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it's very often a challenge. And I could relate, some of these people became friends and so on. I could relate to them. You don't show up there, with a tie and, and a blue suit, I mean, it's you have to adjust, and so on. And when you see the degree of poverty and problem with no running water and so on and so forth, you come back at the center of the government and you argue. I mean, I remember arguing and losing my temper, by, saying, people were saying, we spent too much money and so on and so forth. And, as I said, I lost my temper and I said, when have you been on Indian Reserve the last time? You're racist. and so on. Because very often the bureaucracy didn't have a feel. But when you see a woman barefoot, with 3 or 4 kids which are hungry, in a house, where the eating system, is deficient and so on, you get convictions.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it has improved, you feel, since those days?
Yes, it has improved a lot. Successive governments, since I've spent a lot of money, I've recognized many of the wrongs and are trying to correct them. And of course, the main file is what happened in the residential schools where there were many abuses and so on and so forth by some religious orders, and there were big lawsuits and so on. And the government is doing everything it can, to compensate.
So when you were approached about Canadian National, did you know what the state of CN was at the time?
Well, I did my homework, and I did. And the first thing I did before moving to the job was to visit all of the directors on a one-by-one basis, and asking them for their views, what they liked, what they didn't like, and so on, what they would do, what the new guys should do and shouldn't do, and so on and so forth. And I had a good idea, and I had been very frustrated in my job, at the end of the public service. The way our system works is that in the US, when the president comes in and is elected, he makes, around 3,000 appointments, almost very quickly. In Canada, it's very different. You have new ministers, but the prime minister would change, a handful of people. I mean, 3, 4, and not more, much more than that. And my job was the policy advisor. Basically, I was, responsible for the department advising the prime minister on policy matters. I had nothing to do with party politics. And therefore, I had a small committee helping me to assess the performance of all senior officials, do performance reviews, and so on, make recommendation on changes, promotion, and what have you. And in that context, I became very frustrated to see the red tape, the administrative processes, slowing down every decision and so on. So when I came to CN, I was determined that I would get rid of as much bureaucracy as possible. And that's what I did. And for instance, I interviewed all the executives extensively. And, we had a vice president, a very nice fellow, but, quality control. And, I spent an hour with the guy, and I had a tough time to understand exactly what his mandate was. And then I would ask his colleagues, what do you think, of that quality control, function? I said, well, explain to me first what it's all about. He said, I don't understand, and so on. So to have an impact, took a decision to abolish many of these things. And for instance, on one day, I abolished, 6 VP jobs, the same day. So, you have an impact.
And where did those 6 people go? Did they leave the
Out.
company? Out. So,
And I came to the conclusion that it's very important to make, when you want to change a large organization, to do it with very simple gesture that everybody understands. The first day I was here, I said to the assistant, I had kept the assistant of my predecessor, I said, where do people go for lunch? She said, there is an executive dining room. I said, what? She said, yes. He said, on the floor below, on the floor above. I said, who eats there? Well, EVP and up. I went to see the guy the same day. Very nice fellow. I said, don't worry. You're not being terminated, but I'm closing the dining room. And the next day, my colleagues arrived at the dining room and they realized it was closed. It took 3 hours and the word spread across the organization. So things like that.
symbolic
Exactly.
gestures.
The first week I was here, there was a nursery school here. There is a nursery school. I walked in early in the morning. And there were a mother, with a kid and a few other parents. And she said, are you the new guy? I said, yes. She said, well, I hope that we'll have a chance to talk to you, because we have been trying to double the size of the nursery, but it's getting nowhere, and so on and so forth. I said, where is the nursery? She said, well, here, this floor where I'm getting up. I said, all right, show it to me. I went to her with her, looked at it, and I said, what do you want to do? Well, we want to expand it. There is a long waiting list of employees who want to bring their kids here. I said, what kind of money are we talking about? She gave me a number. I said, take for granted it's approved. The impact.
Sure.
Immediate.
Immediate.
This has nothing to do with the balance sheet.
Right.
Obviously I spoke to the VP Finance and I said, listen, we're going to expand this and so on. You look after the details and what have you. But the impact it has, is critical. So therefore, we did try to do
set the
things
tone
like
early.
this. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And the first day I met with the union, the very first day, first afternoon on the job.
I want to come back to that because that's an interesting point. CN, I wrote down some of the things it was described as. There's a marvelous book, which I know you know of, called The Pig That Flew, about the privatization. And I would commend that to the people who are watching this video if they haven't read it. It's a fascinating story about the events leading up to the privatization. But it was described as a pig with lipstick, an investment disaster waiting to happen, a bloated dinosaur, sad sack, and had more fresh starts than Elizabeth Taylor had husbands. So you're walking into something which I guess if you're an optimist is saying, well, there's nothing but upside opportunity here. But it looks like you were stepping into something that was almost like the leaky vessel that's on the verge of sinking, and you're here to try and turn it around. And so that's a very large challenge. There is some notion that, okay, here's a government bureaucrat, he's coming in and, he's going to just basically perpetuate what's been going on. You didn't do that. And I'm curious about the mindset of, you said earlier, I want a mandate for change. You had that, you had the support of the government, but there had to be a certain amount of drive inside you to say, I'm going to make this work. Can you just talk a little bit about your views in that regard?
Yeah, it's an important point. It was an hierarchy. It was, the CEO would say, "This is a beautiful red wall," and people would say, "Yeah, beautiful red wall." And there would be no challenge. In the boardroom where the executive committee was meeting, nameplates of the executive, as if the executive didn't know the name of their colleague around the table. I walked in 8 o'clock one morning, and I took my jacket. My assistant, who was, I said previously, the assistant of my predecessor, she passed me a note, "Mr. Tellier, people don't take off their jacket." So I had to find ways to challenge this mindset and to bring about change. And therefore, I had to identify as quickly as possible agents of change. Because in any bureaucracy, people who work within that bureaucracy, there are a great many people who are very frustrated. It takes so long to get things done. So you identify the agents of change. For instance, the name that comes to my mind, Jack McBain, who was in operations, was number 2 or number 3 in operations. And very soon, the guy came to me and said, "Paul, I like what you're trying to do. You can count on me. We've got to change. As a railroad, we're losing tons of money and so on. We're not efficient and what have you." So you identify these, and then people very often are afraid of change. So therefore, don't spend too much time trying to convince them to change their views. If you don't succeed quickly, you're better to terminate them and bring new blood. And then I brought in Michael Sabia. I had worked with Michael in Ottawa. I knew intelligent and what kind of a strategic mind he had. And I needed somebody like him, to work closely and making that change. So I spent a lot of time convincing him to come to Montreal.
And his background is finance primarily?
Yeah, he's a graduate economics. He's a graduate from Yale. And very, very driven, very focused, very hardworking, and so on. And to give you an indication of the style, I knew his style. So I said, "Michael, give yourself 3 weeks to assess the situation and so on. Don't judge too quickly." But I knew he was going to become extremely impatient. And one day we're in a committee meeting with our senior colleagues. And Michael said, "Paul, I've just moved to Montreal. I just bought a house. God knows I need my salary to pay my mortgage. But you know what? What you just said doesn't make any goddamn sense." And the reaction that it created.
He said this publicly in front of the other people.
Right in the middle of the executive committee with all my senior colleagues. And I just said 2 minutes ago to you that there used to be nameplates and wearing jacket. And this guy across the table tell me that I'm full of shit. it creates a reaction.
Sure.
And how do you think I reacted? By saying you're right? No. So it became a tennis match, a fairly aggressive tennis match. But people around the table started to realize that's exactly what I wanted. If I say something which is not right, and you're much smarter than I am, and you tell me, Paul, this is not right, it does not make sense, you're paid to tell me that.
Right, not just say yes.
Exactly. So Michael brought this and surrounded himself, like Claude Mongeau, who became a CEO afterwards, surrounded himself with people like this. And he had a vision, the free trade agreement. We had to change the railroad from east-west to north-south and so on and so forth. So he was very eager to deliver on the day-to-day basis, but had that strategic mind and so on. So it's the best decision I ever took, to ask Michael and to convince Michael to come and work with me.
And you're still close today, and he's gone on to do great things in other places.
Oh, yeah, he's been extremely good at everything he has done. When he left here, he went to Bell Canada. Bell Canada had been involved, in foreign operations, had bought some operations in foreign countries. He did a cleanup job there. Then became the CEO of Bell Canada, the largest telecommunications company in Canada. After that, he went to run the biggest pension fund in Canada, here in Quebec. Then the Prime Minister convinced him to go back to Ottawa to run the Department of Finance. He did this for a few years and then came back, and he's now the CEO of Hydro-Quebec. And, again, a big job because, as you know, Quebec was one of the biggest hydro producer of electricity in the world. And we have in Quebec some of the largest, dams, water dams, and so on. But with the demand for electricity, there is a tremendous challenge that has to be addressed. So he was recruited, brought in by the government to basically develop and put in place a strategy to be able to cope with the demand. Norfolk, for instance, the Swedish company producing batteries for electric cars, have decided to come and invest, billions of dollars to build a factory and so on. But obviously, they need power and so on. And the demand for powers over the next while is going to be very high. So this is what CBI is doing.
So you made a comment that you wanted to shift the strategy from east-west to north-south, and I think most of us in the States always viewed CN as, it's the Transcontinental Railroad. It runs from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it has a good franchise. How did you come to the realization? I know there was a lot of discussion about the financial precariousness of the eastern lines, but how did you come to a conclusion that you really wanted to change the direction of the company?
Well, because of the free trade agreement, the movement between North and South, would increase tremendously. For instance, I remember that, and it's more or less the same today, a car, an automotive product between Michigan and Ontario would move 7 times across the border before the product is finished. So therefore, this was increased as a result of the free trade agreement that was signed. And we felt that it was very important to have access to the Gulf Coast and to have access to places like Memphis and so on. And therefore, and improve our situation in Chicago. the hub of the rail network, as we all know, in North America. So as a result, we decided to look at opportunities to expand in the U.S. We had some lines, Central Vermont, Grand Trunk Pacific, and so on and so forth, but that was not good enough. And when we saw the opportunity of acquiring Illinois Central, we did. And as you know, it was the best performing railroads at that point in time, thanks to Hunter Harrison, who was the CEO. And it was strategically well positioned. So we decided to acquire Illinois Central and to integrate Illinois Central.
So deregulation, you come in, deregulation has been instituted in the U.S. and then subsequently in Canada, but slightly differently.
Yeah.
That had to be a helpful stimulus to what you were going through.
Very much so. The Staggers Act, was the first step. It was done on the south of the border. And then we had the equivalent shortly thereafter, on the Canadian side, and so on. Yes, and a recognition in a piece of legislation that it was not only proper, but expected that the railroads would make money. So therefore, moving grains is one thing. Moving forest products is another thing. The same, with coal. But you've got to make sure that you are profitable. And that was a turning point in the scheme of things.
So when you came in, what was your sense of the reaction of the employees and the executives? You get a new guy coming in and everybody's usually on edge until they figure out, what's going to happen. What was your read on that?
I must say that I was disappointed that my senior colleagues had not done their homework. And for them, it was a bureaucrat coming from Ottawa, from the central government, no sense of urgency, 2.5-hour lunch with a few martinis, walking in at 9:30 in the morning, and so on. And if they had done their work,
they would have known that.
They would have known that. I've been walking into my office, forever, at 7:30 at the latest.
And did you work late? Did you stay late in the evening too?
Yeah. I would try to go home at 7, but my schedule was 6 days a week because my style was on Friday, and I've done that for a great many years. On Friday, I was expecting from my most senior colleagues a 1 or 2 pager. What are you going to do next week? And the benefit of this is I could see the key players of the team was being deployed as resources, and who was doing what to whom and so on. For instance, in marketing, if the VP marketing was saying, I'm going to visit, this forest products company on the West Coast. And it happened that the week before I had spoken to this guy, in a different context, I would tell him. And the reason 6 days a week, I never work on Saturday.
Oh.
But on Sunday, I would start reviewing details, these reports from my senior colleagues, and unfortunately, I have to admit, calling them very often.
On Sunday.
Yeah, and so on. So not all of them, but some of them, when I had a preoccupation and so on. So I was on a 6-day schedule, and Friday night, I would not work. I would leave early, Saturday would be devoted to sports and so on. And on Sunday morning after my exercise, I would start working, and my wife would say, "You're working again." "I'm not working, I'm having fun."
So that's an interesting segue, because the hours that you keep and the schedule that you had has to have an impact on family life. How did your wife and kids handle the fact that you're basically gone a lot, either physically or mentally, focused on the railroad?
To be frank, my children, but especially my son, to this day, would from time to time say, "Dad, you rarely showed up at my football games." So, you have regrets. Yes, you do have regrets. When your son, was 55 years of age, and he was working, when he was senior partner at McKinsey, you can imagine he was crisscrossing, the world.
Sure.
And so on. But he has a point, So my wife would go and watch his football games and so on. My daughter was a great athlete, is a great athlete to this day. She was playing basketball, volleyball. She was a swimmer, and so on and so forth. I miss many of her competitions, and I feel sorry about that.
And your wife, how did she, you've been married, 65 years or something like that?
Yes.
But she handled this obviously well enough to...
Very, very well.
Yeah.
Very well. And whenever there was an opportunity, either when I was going far north or visiting Aboriginal communities, or, going to Washington, to discuss, a merger or what have you, an acquisition, when I had a chance, she would be along.
So CN was a fairly bloated from an employee standpoint, and you realized fairly early on that had to change. And I know from my days at what was Penn Central, I think we had 105,000 people the day that the company was merged, and after its various iterations and became Conrail and was down to something like 23,000 and much more efficient. How did you assess and move forward in what had to be painful and also, I would think, would engender some hostility between, the rank and file, or among the rank and file? Could you take us through that?
Yes, it was very painful. We're trying to do it in a fair fashion. We had to improve productivity all across the board. We had too many people. There had been too many political interventions to our staff across the land. And we're an household name. And as a result, the labor force had to be trimmed. And we did it as smoothly and as fairly as possible. And it's never easy, but those who were staying behind had the possibility of seeing the results and so on. And of course, with the privatization, it was a big incentive because I didn't want to persuade our employees to buy the stock. And I was saying this is too much of a personal decision and so on. But they did, big time.
Yeah.
And as a result, it had quite an impact. One day I was always trying to meet the people, on the shop floor. And one day I'm out west, I don't remember whether it was, Edmonton or Vancouver, and I was having a meeting, in a yard with the employees. And at the question period, one guy, raised his hand and he said, "Who is the smart ass, at headquarters who decided that from now on, our pickup trucks are going to be serviced not by, the gas station, a block from my place, but 20 miles down the road?" And he said, "I'm a shareholder and I disagree with that decision." Everybody started clapping and so on. And another guy said, "Yeah, I'm a shareholder too, and it makes no sense." So I come back to headquarters and I said, "Is this true?" "Yeah, but why are we doing this? The guy has to drive his pickup truck with somebody else to bring him back.
Sure.
Leave the pickup truck there for a change of oil, when it could be done, on the street corner, 3 blocks away from his place, and so on and so forth." So therefore, it's not people at headquarters who changed that decision. It was people who had invested in Canadian National, and the guy said, "We're wasting money." So that was from the day, we're privatized, with putting, information from day one. We were listed. Where were the stock price? Where was, the operating ratio? Where was the safety record? And so on. People walking in this building, and in other buildings would see this. So they would see a direct relationship between their performance and the value of the company. And then it creates pride. I mean, never mind CP, we're much better than these guys. And we'll show that.
Well, I think, we should point out that when you walk into the lobby here at headquarters, there's a big board, right? You can't miss it when you walk into the elevators that has all of those statistics on it. And it's in color and it's animated and it's impressive. You said on day one, I think, that you met with the head of the union or head of one of the unions. If I'm the head of the union, my job is to keep my membership happy, to increase it if I can, to get more money from them, and that for those guys. What was his attitude toward you, and what kind of questions did he ask, and what did you tell him?
Well, as a matter of fact, we met with all the head of the union. So there were many unions, and so the broadness of way and maintenance of way, and so on and so forth. We met with all of them. So they had been all invited, and they all came.
One at a time?
No. All in the same room.
All in the same room.
All in the same room. And I said, "Listen, the purpose is, I'm the new guy. I want to introduce myself. And I will try to answer as many questions as possible. You understand, I just came in," and so on. But I think that as a gesture of courtesy, you should see the face of the guy who runs this place, who is going to be running this place. So I'm delighted to shake hands with all of you, as I did before we started the meeting, and so on and so forth. And this is what we're trying to do, and we are losing money in many places, and you understand this has to change. It cannot go on, asking, doing the budget, and at the end of the year, there's a big deficit, and then you turn to the government of Canada and you say, "Can we have a check for this amount?" So it cannot work like this, and so on. And, maybe I spoke too much at that meeting in the sense that, I didn't keep my cards as close to my chest as I should have. So
In what way?
Well, the word got out that the guy is in, for a big downsizing. And so on, and calls started to come from Ottawa, and their shit is hitting the fan. You've got to be careful in what you say, and so on and so forth. But
so
there is a reference to this in the book, that you're talking about.
Just like in the U.S., you call your congressman and say, "These are bad people doing bad things to your district."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You also had a fairly heavy emphasis on improving technology, and I know CN became a leader in many respects in technology. Could you talk a little bit about what assessment did you make, and then what view did you have toward taking it to the next level?
Well, because I was not a railroader, and because I never tried to become, a professional railroader, understanding, the minute details of railroad operations, I relied very heavily on our people like Jack McBain that I've already mentioned, and therefore I would support any serious effort, to use technology and so on. And we had, I don't know exactly whether it was a subsidiary or, but was doing research and
Is this Canac?
Yeah, Canac, and providing consulting services and so on. So we tried to make them more a center stage and what have you, and trying to do a lot of progress on this. And when 9/11 happens, it was very, very important with 400 trains crossing the border in those days. It was very important to have advanced technology to be able to satisfy Homeland Security south of the border that the trains were safe.
I think one of the things that leapt out is the invention of the belt pack, which is now a lot more widespread, of course. Can you talk a little bit about that and who came up with it, and how did you deploy that, and what was the reaction among the employees when you come out and said, now we can run this like independently from being in the cab?
It required a lot of patience. The unions were opposed to it.
Shockingly.
And the unions were successful in convincing the regulators, both in Ottawa and in Washington, that it was a dangerous device, moving locomotives through remote controls as opposed to somebody on board. And we had to spend a lot of time, I went to Washington, met, with the Safety Transportation Board and so on, to convince them. And we started slowly. If my memory serves me well, we started, 3 or 4 miles down the road here, just on the outskirts of Montreal, with one, and brought in some union leaders and showed them what was doing and so on. And again saying, listen, look at the cost saving, and we tried to convince, I personally tried to convince my colleagues to join forces, to look at this, to endorse this, and so on, so that we could collectively argue the case in Washington and so on. But that was a significant breakthrough. Yes.
And how did that go, trying to get other carriers to be supportive of it?
Some, I must say, my recollection is vague. Some, I hesitate to name one or two. Some of my colleagues were quite receptive. Others were very, very prudent, very careful, especially because of the labor relations reaction.
So shifting gears a little bit into the marketing front, you brought in Gerald Davies from the U.S., who'd been at Burlington Northern, was very familiar with the Conrail privatization and so forth. Can you just talk a little bit about what made you pick him? What was his vision? Did it correspond with yours? Did you collaborate on the vision that you wanted? I'm curious about how that evolved.
Gerald was a major asset because of his background, his knowledge of Conrail, because he had written or contributed to write a report on the privatization of Conrail. And as you know, the privatization of Conrail was a success. And the sales pitch that we were making to potential investors is privatization of Conrail was successful. There are not that many big railroads in North America. The only one that remains that's going to be privatized is CN. So if you and your clients didn't make money with Conrail, well, don't miss the boat again, and so on. And you know why? The guy who was seated here, Gerald Davis, is the guy who wrote that report, for the privatization. So, it was putting a face to something which was very relevant to our storytelling, and so on. And then, Gerald, during the road show, would make his contribution and so on. And after this, he became the top marketing executive and so on. But that connection was very critical.
And he instituted the business unit approach here that had been used very successfully at Burlington Northern, setting up the strategic business units. How did that work? Do you feel that worked well at CN as it did in the States?
I think so. Yes, I think so. Yes, and yes.
The Eastern lines were a systemic problem, and I'm curious, being from the States, why was that? It's rich in natural resources. The track network was fairly extensive. What was the problem out there, and what did you see as the resolution to that problem? And then if you would comment maybe a little bit on the fact that things seems to have reversed course from it being a bleeding ulcer back in your time to now something that is an area that seems to be attractive to CN and CP.
Well, in the East, there is a question of density. There is a port of Halifax, but, as compared to Vancouver or even, Prince Rupert, it's not the same size. And many of course, you've got the St. Lawrence Seaway and so on, but many of the natural resources are moving more, in the west, towards the west coast and what have you. And therefore, you're aware, because you know the subject inside out, you're aware that on a short haul, truckers are more effective. And therefore, in many cases, depending on the commodities that you're moving, and therefore, between the two major cities in the east, Montreal, Toronto, very often the customer would prefer, to truck it as opposed to rail it, and what have you. And I remember, one of my directors was from Toronto saying, I'm coming down on Highway 401. How come? I have all these trucks, in my way, and so on and so forth. And I had to explain, that, sometimes it was difficult to be competitive. So the West was always performing better. And this is why it was important for us to try to improve, the density in the East.
So part of that evolved into you trying to make a deal with CP to either combine lines or maybe even sell lines to CP. Would you kind of take us through how that started and what the process was and how it evolved?
Yeah, we're losing big dollars, in Eastern Canada. And by Eastern Canada, I mean really, east of Quebec, but especially including, east of Thunder Bay.
East of Thunder Bay, just for the gringos south of the border, is virtually north of Chicago, right?
Exactly. So on the size of Lake Superior, and so on, and it's east of Winnipeg, which is the next Canadian city. And so looking at the numbers, it was obvious that if we could do something together, it would make sense. So we went to see CP, which was just across the street, CP headquarters at that point in time, CP Limited and CP Rail. We were here in Montreal, so we walked a block away, and Sabia and I, and Barry Scott was the CEO of CP Rail. And obviously, we were bigger players than they were in the East. And we thought that by joining forces, we could make this profitable. And the negotiations went very well. And then at one point in time, they said, well, if we can strike a good deal in our favor, maybe we just forget these negotiations and try to take over CN in the East completely and eliminate CN as a competitor. And this was extremely badly received, by the Minister of Transport, because CP had neglected the East, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and so on and so forth, long history in this. And therefore, the minister said, no, wait, I'm going to sell to these people, because the first thing you'll do is that, they will close down lines and so on and so forth. The situation will get from bad to worse. So therefore, he was coming from New Brunswick, from one of the eastern provinces, reacted very negatively to their approach, and turned to me and one of his advisors, the deputy chairman of Nesbitt Burns, which is now part of the Bank of Montreal. And in an historical meeting in Ottawa, in Toronto, he said, "All right, I'm not going to sell to these guys. Can we privatize now?" And I said, "Minister, if you give me a few more quarters, it would be easier to demonstrate that we are profitable, that we have improved efficiency tremendously." He said, no, you don't have time. We're going to do this now. So I said, okay. And
now we're in 1994, roughly?
We were, yes, exactly. And late 94. And he said, what can I do for you? And I said, give me a good board. And in the past, many of them were political appointees. They were not bad people. Some of them were very good directors, but they were political appointees. So I said, I don't care whether the individual is liberal, conservative, or whatever, but make sure that they are top people and business people. And he delivered. So people like, Purdy Crawford, Dan, and to this day, one of the most respected directors, before he passed away, in Canada, Imasco, which was a holding company, very successful, pharmaceutical, and not pharmaceutical, but the retail business of pharmaceutical, tobacco industry, trust company, and so on. Then the CEO of the Bank of Nova Scotia, who had been the CEO for 18 years, Cedric Ritchie, former CEO of Bell Canada, largest telecommunications company. Then the chief economist of the Royal Bank of Canada, the largest financial institution.
So he took you seriously. He didn't just say, I'm going to get my buddies and put them
Very. And it was... So I came back from Toronto and I said, Sabia, we've got a mandate. We've got to privatize this thing now. And he said, have you checked the free cash flow lately? I said, yes. And it's not what it should be, so let's move on.
we were fortunate, it sounds like from reading the book and talking to you last night, that the people in the administration, the government people, the former minister, Mr. Lumley, and other people were all a powerful, influential, smart, driven, and seemed to be aligned and all going in the same direction, right? You didn't have a fight on your hands with the government, at least.
No, the only fight, you're perfectly right. The minister was smart, business background, as I said before, ready to take quick decisions, but not a lot of bureaucracy, to erect roadblocks. And time was of the essence. And had a good relationship with the Prime Minister and that of his colleagues, especially the Minister of Finance, which was very critical, because obviously, if you want to privatize, what would you do first? You would try to reduce your debt and therefore dump as much debt as possible on the shoulders of the government and retain all the assets. So for instance, Canadian National, going back to the days where, it was in hotels and the hotel business, we had, an hotel, near La Place de l'Opéra in Paris, which was a good piece of real estate, and so on. Well, obviously, we wanted to hold on to these assets, but he had in place a young woman called Moya Green from Newfoundland, very impressive young person. And he said, I want the privatization of CN to be done and quickly, but I don't want the government to be screwed in that process. So you look after the interests of the government of Canada. So every time that Michael and I wanted to dump something, on the knees of the government, she was there saying, no. This is part of your assets. And, it's not because it's losing money that you're going to give it to us, and so on. So there was a big debate on this and ought to clean the balance sheet before we go to potential investors.
But you did a lot by shifting non-rail assets, real estate and so forth, to the government in exchange for a cash infusion.
Exactly,
right?
And a significant cash infusion, yes.
900 million?
Yes.
Yeah. That was an inspired way to do that. You had opposition, though, from including the chairman at the time, right, who was not in favor of doing that.
Yes, but thanks to the close relationship that existed between the Minister of Transport and the Minister of Finance, he succeeded in achieving this.
So I read that CP kind of tried to throw a fly into the ointment by saying, look how much money CN has cost the taxpayers over time. It was sort of like, almost a gotcha kind of thing. Did that have any significant impact? Did it help the cause?
It did. It did because by saying the government has spent so much money in CN since its creation in 1917, when this thing goes public, Canadians should have the first shot at the stock. And we knew that was an American story. We knew that the potential large investors, and the facts prove us right, that we asked to promote and sell those shares in the U.S.
And elsewhere, right? Globally.
Yes. And therefore, using this argument that CP had put forward, well, hold it, Canadian taxpayers have invested so much in CN that, you have to give the top priority to the investment banks, Canadian investment banks, and they have to be able to satisfy their clients before you start, selling the stock in the U.S. And we ended up with a balance, but we knew, and I said, we Michael Sabia and I, we knew that if we're going to be successful in the U.S., and as a result, the demand in the U.S. would grow much faster than the demand in Canada for the stock, and that's exactly what happened. And I would say I cannot give you a precise number, precise year, but we became the largest company with the largest foreign-owned shareholder base in Canada.
And there was an interesting provision in that, in the privatization that capped the percentage a single investor could hold at 15% to, I guess, avoid Union Pacific or somebody else coming in and saying, aha, I'm going to buy that. That was an interesting provision, and you said that had subsequently changed.
It is currently 25%, and it was a very important point because it was a negotiating point. Some, like the Minister of Finance, wanted to put a ceiling on foreign ownership. And as a counter-proposition, we said, let's put a ceiling on to avoid the company being taken over, by outsiders, non-Canadians. Let's put a ceiling, and the 15% came on this. And it was increased to 25 because early on, one of our first investors was Bill Gates, Cascade Investment, his investment arm. And it was the fact that Cascade decided for Mr. Gates to invest in Canada National became a very strong selling point because would visit shareholders, would visit potential, the financial community, and I would always finish my pitch by saying, well, let's face it, CN stock may not be good enough for you, but it's good enough for Bill Gates, who has 6%, who has 10%, who has 15%, and so on.
And he got up as high as how?
Close to 20.
Close to 20.
So this is why it was changed for 15, 25. Yeah. And
his,
he's still a major shareholder.
He didn't go on any road shows with you, though.
No. And I should say that I was so impressed. One day I went with the investor relations vice president to visit Cascade. And, in my mind, in Seattle, I was expecting, very sophisticated, very impressive building, with beautiful paintings and so on. And the driver who drove us from the airport on the Sunday night, he said, "Are you going to Cascade?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You know where it is?" I said, "Yeah, we know. It's across the street from the hotel." Next morning, we got up to go to Cascade, and there was a small shopping center, and they were on the second floor, a small plaque, Cascade Investment. I said to Bob, Noriega, our VP Investor Relations, I said, seems to be the right place. So we went up the stairs, outside staircase, and so on, and knock on the door. Somebody said, "Come on in." We walked in, and so on. And Michael Larson, the guy who was running it, said, "Hi, guys. Want a coffee? Coffee machine is there." I was expecting, something like walking
like Goldman
into
Sachs.
Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley.
Right.
Beautiful.
Paneled wood. And,
So his first, so he said, "Thank you very much for coming." But he said, you don't have to do this regularly. Because he said, if we don't like the stock now, we'll walk away. So he said, "Don't worry, we'll tell you, and then we'll walk away." So he said, "We're very satisfied." So there was they were a very pleasant shareholder, very, very pleasant shareholder to do business with.
So the task force that was set up to evaluate privatization unanimously said, let's do it. Was there any opposition in the administration, in the government, or from the provinces to going the privatization route?
Not to the best of my knowledge, because, you know, the minister had the support of his colleague, and more importantly, the support of the prime minister, and therefore it was pretty smooth sailing to the best of my knowledge. And the minister was very effective.
So you, because of the notion of, well, I guess to back up a little bit, the prior privatizations related to Air Canada and to the electric utility, was it electric utility?
It was a navigation system, you know, NAV Canada, you know, the traffic controllers and so on.
Okay. Those had not gone particularly well, and there was a lot of skepticism about, here's another turkey that we're going to have to deal with. And the press was particularly harsh about the prospects that nobody's going to want this turkey and so forth. Obviously, that they had egg on their face afterwards. But there wasn't any opposition. Nobody said, oh, you know, we've done this before, it didn't work, so.
No, there was support, there was political support. The prime minister was very supportive and so on. And, you know, Mr. Young was a very effective minister.
So it seemed like a couple times you got out ahead of your skis on talking about privatization, and it got in the newspaper and so forth and created a bit of a kerfuffle. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how you dealt with that?
Well, yeah, I've already referred to the fact that, you know, first meeting with the unions, I said that, you know, they were forcing me to give a number, and I said, well, we'll start with 5,000, downsizing, and so on. So it made the headlines, and you know, I was called by Ottawa, and I was called to Ottawa. And some said, listen, he has already said it. So listen.
Can't unring the bell.
Exactly. The damage has been done, but at the same time, there is a benefit, you know. So, and therefore, you know, going back, perhaps I would be more careful, but it created quite an impact. And I suppose that it was overall very positive.
Michael Sabia was quoted, we just went like a bat out of hell to get this thing done. There was a sense of urgency amongst the finance minister, Mr. Martin, and yourself, and Mr. Young to really advance this cause really quickly. And when you look back on it, it's happened so fast. Was that just because everybody believed in this and there was a sense of urgency to it? I mean, it was an amazing feat when you think about it's the largest privatization in Canadian history, and it went exceedingly well, so that's a blessing. But what was the feeling like at the time you're going through?
Well, if it's going to be done, let's do it, and let's do it quickly, and let's do it effectively, and let's demonstrate that it can be a success. So therefore, you know, what's the point of taking, you know, months when something can be done in weeks? So therefore, we had that sense of excellence and that sense of urgency. And we wanted to be the best, and we wanted to be privatized as quickly as possible in order to create, you know, that impetus to become the best.
And Parliament basically endorsed this, right? And you didn't have members of Parliament who were saying, well, wait a minute, I know this is going to mean they're going to abandon track in my province, or...
Yeah, obviously there were some of this, but that's part of party politics and so on and so forth. But it was never a major impediment. And our approach was very much to explain. And I remember a session in New Brunswick, and the Premier of New Brunswick, you know, was was a top-notch guy, who's still around. He's the vice chairman of one of the banks in Canada, and Frank McKenna, and he was the premier of New Brunswick, and we had a big shop, with hundreds of people who had been there for ages in Moncton. And I went to see the premier, and the premier was very, very focused on economic development. And I explained to him that we wanted to close down that shop, hundreds of jobs. And he went through the roof. And, I'm working flat out, to create new jobs for my people, and you guys arrive, and, and so on and so forth. And I said, Mr. Premier, do you mind to give me half an hour? We'll sit down, and I'll show you why we're doing this. And I had some paper, I'd put it on the coffee table in front of him. And I started to explain that we didn't need all these shops. We had to centralize, our shops where we were repairing the equipment and so on. And at the end, he said, I'm very angry. But you know what? Understand your case. So, it requires a lot. It requires a lot of explaining. I mean, his people. He was. It was his constituency, and he would have defend publicly that hundreds of good jobs, well-paying jobs, mechanics and so on and so forth, would disappear, and you have to explain. And sometimes you win the battle and you lose the battle. One day, similar situation. I'm in Prince George, the other end of the country. And we are going to close the shop. And Prince George is a small town. I don't know exactly what is the population, but 300 or 400 jobs is significant. And I say to our vice president for the region, I want a meeting with the employees and the spouses. So pick the time of the week, anytime, I'll be there. I'm going to speak to them personally. I want to explain the case. And I explained the case, and the meeting was going quite well.
And that's a but coming.
And then a woman got up and said, you're talking about operating efficiency and so on. You know what? I've got 2 kids in the hockey team in Prince George. That hockey team is not going to survive. Do you realize what you're doing to my family? And she started to cry. She got the support of the crowd.
Yeah.
From that day on, from that moment on, I knew that I had lost the session. There was nothing
No coming
that I could.
back.
There was nothing that I could say to reassure these people.
Yeah.
It was totally emotional and so on. So, in New Brunswick, as I said a minute ago, with McKenna, we succeeded. He was angry, but he understood because he's a very smart guy.
Yeah.
In Prince George, I lost the battle. We closed the shop, but
It was troubling.
And these moments are very, very difficult. Very difficult.
Right.
And the most difficult moments is when you lose an employee. And I had a very bad experience at the turning of the century. We had here, 30 miles from here, a big accident. We had a unit train moving ultramar petroleum products, a unit train of 68 cars, moving the products from just outside of Quebec City to their refinery towards Ontario. And there was a car in the other direction. The tracks were very close. And there was a derailment of one track, of one car. And the locomotive engineer tried to inform his colleague on the other train coming in the other direction. And it was too late, and huge fires, and we lost 2 men. And I decided that I had the practice of always phoning the spouse, companion, boyfriend, girlfriend, and so on. And if I'm not mistaken, it was New Year's Day or something like that. And I phoned the First Lady, and I explained, I said, I'm really sorry, and so on. And I said, is there anything I can do for you? I said, human resources people will be there. Don't worry about the pension, you know, and so on and so forth. Everything will be looked after for you. But is there today something that can be done? She said, yes. She said, I have a lot of confidence in my brother-in-law. He lives on the West Coast. He cannot afford to fly to Montreal. Would it be possible to get a plane ticket, you know, for it? I said, yes. Today, somebody from CN will bring you a plane ticket for it. And she made the arrangements. Then I phoned the other person, and she said, you're a criminal. And she took a strip of my back for about 25 minutes. You know? And
you just have to listen. Right?
I was in love with this man for 23 years. And this cutting of yours, you're cutting corners, you're taking safety risk, and so on and so forth. And I was upstairs, you know, in the country, and I came down, and my wife said, you're crying. I said, yeah. These are tough moments.
Yeah, very.
These are very tough moments.
So how did that one play out after the 25-minute lashing that you got?
There was no way I could, you know, we were trying, you know, obviously I was always talking to human resources and say, listen, you know, I don't want you to be there in a week. I want somebody there today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
And reassure them as much as possible and so on. But, you know, when you lose somebody, you know, like this,
right.
You know, and there's a family and what have you, there is nothing that you can do. But I have always found this extremely painful. And, you know, you apprehend making the call. You made the call, and after the call, you know, you're deeply in trouble,
sure.
And so on. But it's, you know, it's very, as you know, it's the risk in moving trains and cars, you know, is very, very high.
Nothing is risk-free.
Exactly.
So last night I mentioned the fact that Gordon Trafton and Bill Berry wanted me to convey their regards to you, and they both expressed, it was interesting talking to both of them about the fact that they loved working for CN and working for you and saw you as a mentor. And I'm curious, as you went through life growing up, who you considered to be mentors that made you, helped you make major decisions or advised you and you looked up to as people you could count on for sound advice, other than Mrs. Tellier?
Well, I have always attached the most importance to integrity. And, you know, when I see somebody showing a lot of integrity and not being able to compromise that at all, I'm always impressed by this. I had a boss in Ottawa who was the top guy in the public service, the job that I ended up having. And Mr. Robertson, he was an outstanding Canadian. And I learned a lot from him because he had a way to speak to the Prime Minister of the day and telling him exactly how he felt about an issue and making sure that the advice would be received and hopefully listened to and so on. And I've always admired, this factor of integrity. And I have here in Montreal a friend, an outstanding man, Stephen Jarilowski. The family was successful in getting out of Germany, just before Hitler was in power, but he left. And fascinating career, moved to Canada at one point in time. To make a long story short, started an investment firm that he sold for $1 billion to Nova Scotia Bank, 2 or 3 years ago. And I said to him, he's now 98, and it's unbelievable. We go salmon fishing every year together. He's unbelievable. Reads, everything. And I was saying to Stephen the other day, I said, Stephen, given your background and so on, and what you have, your achievements, if you had to advise a young person today, what are the 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would give him or give her? And he said, 1, structure your thinking. This is what education is all about. Learn how to think. Structure your thinking. Too many people try to resolve a problem before defining the problem. Structure your thinking. And secondly, integrity. And I think these have basic values that you have to adhere to.
So I want to spend some time talking about labor relations and operational improvements. And an example came to mind when I was with Boston and Maine. We had these archaic labor agreements, one of which resulted in what we called phantom crews. And the example I'm thinking of is in Worcester, Massachusetts. They had abolished the switch engine there, and the result of the agreement was we had to pay the 5-man crew anyway to come to work and sit in the art office and play cards or do whatever they did. And the most appalling or ironic thing about all of that was when those guys went on vacation, we had to call a relief crew to come in to fill those positions. I know that at CN you had similar issues with arbitraries and work rule restrictions and things that were inefficient and crew scheduling and things like that. So you went through some kind of process re-engineering to figure that out. Could you talk a little bit about what you did and how you did it in whatever level of detail you think is appropriate?
Well, the critical factor, of course, is the union or unions. And therefore, I was always a believer that you should not take them by surprise. You should engage into a dialogue right at the outset before doing anything, and so on. And for instance, combining the various trades in our shops. It was very important to succeed this. And we identified the strongest leader. There were 7 competing unions. And we explained, why we were trying to, eliminate these artificial barriers. Why, did we need more than one individual to remove electric motor from a locomotive. Why did we need both a mechanician, a mechanics, and an electrician, and so on and so forth? And I like to believe that common sense does prevail. And if you don't take, the other party by surprise, you can make a lot of progress. And I was always saying, to our people in labor relations, do use the friendly approach. Try to convince people. Don't bind the table, and so on. And I recruited a lady, Kim Madigan, for labor relations. And her personality was such, you could not get angry at Kim. It was impossible.
So how did you find her?
And I'm trying to remember where she was, but she was just amazing. And many of the unions that we have and that we had were cross-border unions. And she would come with me to Washington or to New York or to elsewhere, Philadelphia. And, I remember one day, one of the big union leader said, Kim is here. There is no way I can get angry. So it's very often, we had a major labor strike in the social sector in Quebec around Christmas. Schools were closed, hospital strikes, and so on and so forth. And so much tension. And I was watching this as a taxpayer, and I would say, surely there must be a better way to do things.
So it was the kinder, gentler approach, but with a clear focus on improving efficiency. Were you able to, so one of the outgrowths of deregulation in the U.S. was the ability to spin off non-productive traffic largely to short lines. And so there was a proliferation of short lines who were able to serve customers better with lower labor costs and have people, one day I'm an engineer, the next day I'm a track guy or I'm a mechanic, and I had multifacets. Were you able to achieve that at CN, to have craft lines?
Yes, very much so. And selling these small lines, was a big drive, of our efforts to improve, performance. And yes.
But within the unions, the rigid craft lines, were you able to then subsequently blur those and have?
Yes. In our shops, we move from 7 down to 1. Yes. Quite successfully.
And I had a reference about the 1995 labor negotiations where you and CP decided to take a harder line on the negotiations. Did you confer ahead of time with CP on that, or was it just happenstance that you said, okay, we're gonna come together on
I must say that frankly don't remember, but I would be surprised if we had consulted in advance.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the thesis that you needed to have commercial viability as a critical principle, and that probably, I would think, carried some weight with the labor front, that look, we've got to be practical about it. You use the term common sense. I keep thinking about, I think it was Will Rogers said, I don't know why they call it common sense when so few people have it, but I think there's a logical path that you tried to take, it seems like, with these folks to explain why you were doing what you were doing and explain the necessity.
Very much so. And the legislation helped us because the legislation was changed to make it crystal clear that profitability was essential. And therefore, we could say, listen, we don't have any choice, unless we make money with this, the service has to stop and so on. There was, a legal requirement, to make our activities profitable.
The whole privatization effort hinged really on in getting the shares marketed to a number of buyers beyond the borders of Canada, and you selected Goldman Sachs as the lead banker in that, along with some Canadian banks. Was that a controversial decision at the time to pick it outside of Canada?
Yes, in some circles, yes, because again, the argument was being put forward. Canadian taxpayers have invested so much in that company. Now it's going to be privatized, and the big fees are going to be paid to an American firm as opposed to a Canadian firm. But again, what was the objective? The objective was to make this investment attractive where the money is, which is, and where the knowledge is, the U.S. And therefore the U.S. and abroad, but especially the U.S. And therefore we needed a top bank, to help us achieve that. And we selected Goldman Sachs, and I went to see the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and I said, I want to make it crystal clear. If we select you, you're going to make a few dollars with us. I want, your best team. I don't want the B team. I want the best team. And, I'm serious. And you're going to hear from me if, we don't have the key players. You are a very successful organization. I want the A team. And we got the A team. And our American advisors and the Canadian advisors got very well together. People like Evan Siddall, was working, with Nesbitt Burns, was very good at working with his colleagues, at Goldman Sachs. And we had at Goldman Sachs, Mark Tursek, was top-notch, very good. And the analysts, of course, Clegg Kloner. An interesting story about Mark Tursek. One day, he and Michael Sabia walk into my office. And Michael usually, was very confident and so on. And I was walking and with Mark, and he said, Paul, I've got a few minutes. I said, of course, go ahead. He said, well, that's a bit delicate, but we think that Andre, your wife, should come on the roadshow. And I said, what? He said, yeah. He said, Mark and I, we had discussed that. I said, why is that? He said, together, it's going to be a very stressful process, and she's going to calm you down. So she will not come to every city. So, for instance, we'd go to Paris, we'd go to Milan, and then we'd sleep in Zurich. Well, she would go straight to Zurich,
She missed Paris and
yeah,
Milan.
yeah, and she would wait for us in Zurich. And I remember, the night we arrived in Zurich, we had a meeting next morning at 8. We arrived in Zurich, must have been 10 or 11 at night. She was on the sidewalk, the door of the hotel, welcoming us, and so on and so forth, and so on. But it was a very unusual kind of advice
Sure.
from from Goldman Sachs and Michael. And, I said this to Andrea when I got home that evening, and she said, "Are they serious?" I said, "Yeah, they know me, and they know you."
So that worked well.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the divestiture, turning non-performing lines into short lines. How did you had a team that would go out and evaluate and say this one needs to go, and then you'd find buyers. Yeah. I know.
Yeah, and Claude Mongeau became later on, the CEO, was very deeply involved in this. He had a team of people and so on. Yeah, and following this very, very closely.
And that, did that go smoothly? Did you have opposition to saying, wait a minute, we can't afford to lose that line? Or was it something where you pretty much all agreed that this needed to go?
I think that there was a general agreement. And again, it was a question of, making sure, arguing the case and making sure that the case, was convincing and what have you. But I don't remember this as being, a especially difficult challenges. It was well done. The team was good, and their assessment was very, very good. And therefore, when we were moving, it was making sense.
So when you instituted executive stock options as a part of the compensation package after you privatized, was that in part retention to attract talent? How did that work? Were people excited about that, given the stock was doing well? I presume so.
Yeah, we felt that it was the right thing to do. It was a good incentive.
And you tied it to operating ratio too, which is interesting.
Exactly. And, it was a way to incentivize the senior executive, and also to reward them, with the success of the company. And it became a major driving force. As I said before, significant percentage of our employees became shareholders.
Do you know what percentage of the employees were shareholders? It was reasonably high, wasn't it?
Initially, it was about 40%. I think that it went higher than that. I would guess 60, but, that's a guess.
Yeah, okay. You also devised a supervisor training program to kind of get out a consistent message. Can you talk a little bit about that? My notes say you had 1,400 people went through that program. I'm curious as to, what was the structure of it? It lasted a day and a half or so. How did you?
Well, it was a question, we kept using the jargon, free cash flow and operating ratio and so on and so forth. And many people, could not relate to this. And it was kind of obvious. So I asked our people, I said, listen, I don't want you to take 6 months, to develop something. It's basic, business knowledge, and what is free cash flow, and so on. And, get to explain that the inventory, that's cash. And the more inventory you have, it costs you something, and what have you. So therefore, very basic business notions. And, we put something together. I relied, on the treasurer and the CFO and so on to make sure that the content was brief, easy to understand, but very relevant to the people day in and day out in the field. And then, I would go and talk to the employees in a shop, and the guy would say, the operating ratio, is going up, and so on and so forth. And
so they got it.
Oh, yeah, they got it.
You also taught a class that labor people came to, which was a separate class. Could you talk about that? Because I think that's the only time I've ever heard of that.
There was an interest because, the employees, supervisors and so on would say, to a leader, a local leader, union leader, well, we cannot do this, there is the cash flow here and so on and so forth. And then very often the union leader would say, what's this guy, talking about, and so on and so forth. So it triggered a significant interest, on their part, and many union leaders registered for the course.
So the merger, the BNSF merger in 95, I guess it
99.
was. 99. Was a significant event in the States. The shareholders did really well from that. That timing kind of coincided with what you were doing. So you have a sort of a groundswell of combinations, concentration, and so forth. And then you had, in the middle of that, you had Jim Foote join CN. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you found him, why you picked him, what his role was here with you.
Well, we needed somebody who could explain to us the relationship between potential investors, investment banks, the research analysts, and management, how to approach, how to sell your story, and so on and so forth. And Jim was very good at this. I don't know how he was identified, but in my first interview with Jim, I really liked the guy. He was very friendly, unpretentious, very self-confident, and we thought that he was the right guy. And it was a very good decision, a very good decision. He would brief us before we would walk into, a major investment bank or investment, firm. And he would say, well, this is not fidelity. This is what they will focus on. This would be their line of questioning, and so on. And he was very good. And, he bonded very quickly, with the key players of the team. And did the road show, never got excited, panicky or what have you. He was the right person to have. And so I don't remember exactly where and how we recruited him, but he was surely one of our good decisions.
So it's amazing the speed with which you got all of this done. It was very quick by probably any standard. You then started to look beyond the borders, as you mentioned earlier, to look at a more of a north-south orientation. And I guess I didn't realize this. I remember when you bought Illinois Central, but you looked at KCS first before that as a potential merger?
I don't know what was the sequence, but I was always interested in KCS. I see it was kind of an obvious case. It was taking us to the Gulf. Best run railroad. Some challenges. It was well, you're aware that Abraham Lincoln worked at one point in time, for Illinois Central, and therefore, for a bunch of Canadians from north of the border, to come in and take over, Illinois Central, you have to do it, with grace and what have you. So we had to spend a lot of time in Washington. One of the things that we did at that point in time was to create in Washington a good office. We recruited a lady, and I'm still in touch with her, Karen Phillips, to open an office 1 block away from the Canadian Embassy, which was useful, and 2 blocks away, from the Hill, from Congress. And she had experience. And before visiting or calling on a senator or a member, she would brief me, she would brief whoever goes, and so on. And she was a major contributor to these efforts. So it was first IC, and then the others, Wisconsin Central and so on. And we had there were some roadblocks, and we had to overcome them. For instance, IC Senator Lott, was the leader of the government in the Senate. Was a key player. He was a supporter. He was a very pleasant man to work with, and very knowledgeable. In his district, of course, he had Gulfport, so he was interested in IC from a district point of view, but also at the total picture, and so on. And then when we move on, I said 99. Well, I thought you were referring to BN. Then BN came, and Rob Krebs and I started having conversation. We didn't want this to make the headlines, so we decided to do it in a low-key fashion and what have you. I went to meet with his board, and we had a good discussion. They were joking, about, I remember one of his directors saying, you guys will understand each other, Paul, with your French accent and so on. It was funny. And so I was there in Fort Worth. And then the opponents were pretty strong. I mean, Dick at UB was opposed to this. Dick Cheney was the chairman of his board. John Snow, was a CSX. And the customer community became very hostile because the merger between Union Pacific and Southern Pacific had not gone smoothly.
Right.
The merger, on the BN side had not gone smoothly. And therefore, we're coming in the aftermath of this, and they would say to the DuPont of this world, the kind of mess that you had to go through.
Yeah, going to do it all again.
Exactly. So, and they convinced the Transportation Board, and spent a lot of time in Washington trying to convince Linda Morgan, but we did not succeed. And when Rob and I were told that we would have to wait, 18 months, how can you convince your shareholders to park their money for 18 months? So Rob and I, we met. I think he was traveling, he was in Boston, I was in Boston. We met, the airport, and we said, well, we got to call it off.
Did you ever give any thought to possibly restarting it a little further down the line, or was it just dead?
No. It would have been quite a line, and quite a network. Yeah. It would have been superb. Yeah.
And it would probably, almost inevitably, would have forced other combinations.
Yeah. Well, that was the argument, and that was the argument of those who were opposed to it. And these people. Well, first of all, it was very, very pleasant to work with Rob. Rob Krebs on this, and so on. And we always kept, we're cool. We never became overly excited. When we made the announcement here in Montreal, Rob was there, and so on. It was a good occasion. But then, on the other side, Dick Davidson and his team, and John Snow, and David Good, a bit less aggressive, but, they didn't want us, to do this, and they did everything possible, to prevent, the transaction.
So you did buy the Illinois Central, which had been another case of overextended light density lines and not performing very well. And then when Hunter Harrison got involved, he got it in, leaned it down and got it profitable. And when you acquired it, you acquired him too. And I think you said last night you're one of the assets. The company, we bought the assets and you're part of the asset base or something.
We paid too much and therefore you're part of the assets.
Right. So I think the people who are going to watch this interview are going to be very interested in the dynamics between the two of you, because you have two extremely strong personalities with definite opinions, but are poles apart in terms of temperament and so forth. And maybe you could talk about how you, you decided that you wanted to have him as part of the acquisition, because that's not always the case. Oftentimes the existing management gets ejected. You decided to keep that, and he then became a key part of Canadian National and then went on to succeed you. So could you spend some time and take us through the process and the dynamics there and how you guys work together?
Well, first of all, I think the very day that we signed the deal, and it was interesting because there was an ice storm in Quebec, and we were without power for 4 days. And we signed the agreement. The final discussion with Hunter took place in a private club in Montreal with candlelight. There was no electricity. Hunter, at that moment, very shortly thereafter, said, "Paul, when do you want me to go?" And then I told him, no, you're part of the assets, you're staying.
Was he pleased with that?
I think so. But, he did not impose himself. "Do you want me, yes or no?" So he said, "I'm ready to go whenever you say so." And I said, no, I want you to stay. And
what made you say that? Because you didn't really know him very well at that point.
Not much, but the record at IC was speaking for itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And secondly, he was a very convincing individual. He was a real preacher. And
evangelist, I think you said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember one day, one of our first visits in the field together, we arrived in the yard in Winnipeg, which is a critical yard for CN. And we went into the tower. He said, Paul, look at this. My God, the design of that yard. I mean, it was like a kid, in a toy shop and so on. So he was so convinced of his approach to schedule railroading and so on, and so good the way he was talking about the metrics and what have you. So it would have been foolish on my part to get in his way. So therefore, and the board was very concerned about this. The board said, Paul, first of all, are you going to understand his southern drawl? And is he going to understand your French accent? And they said, if you don't talk to one another, there will be a clash fairly soon. And I said, listen, there is so much money on the table. This is going to succeed. So therefore, I came very quickly to the conclusion that first, he was bar none the best railroader. And therefore, who am I to question whether we should run 5,000, 8,000, or 10,000 foot train? You know, that's his expertise. At the same time, I realized very quickly he didn't like to deal with shareholders. He didn't like to deal with consumers. And he hated governments.
Trifecta.
And therefore, I said, okay, I leave you the operations and I look after these constituencies. And because he was so, I hesitate to use brutal, but so tough with the employees, I did try to compensate by spending a fair amount of time with the employees on the shop floor. So the way I would do it is that I would go to a site and I would invite the first line supervisor for breakfast. And then I would meet with their boss, with senior management in that location. And I would report to them what I had heard at breakfast. And I would ask them for an answer to some of these questions. And then, I was able to talk to the employees in knowledge of the situation. And I knew that, sometimes he was a bit rough. And therefore, I was trying to compensate or to fully support him. One day, there was a strike in Winnipeg, a picket line, because I had moved. I think it was Keith Creel, who is now running CP, to Winnipeg. And he said, and Americans in Winnipeg, this is a major point, of CN network and so on and so forth. And my advisor was saying, well, don't go, it's a picket line, don't go too close to them, and so on and so forth. I said, the hell, I'm going to talk to them. And started to complain about this. I said, you know what?
You're talking to the guys on the picket line.
Yeah. I said, you know what? You're not going to tell me whether it's an American or a Canadian who is going to run this place in Winnipeg. Okay? I go for the best person. You know what? You got this guy from Memphis running Winnipeg. You know what? Last week I took a guy from BC and I moved it to Jackson, Mississippi. Whether you like it or not, this is the way we're going to run this company. And Hunter could see that I was supporting him 100% and so on.
So he was okay with you going out in his territory?
He would. But, I was not second-guessing his decision.
Right.
I was just trying, to answer a question a bit more patiently than he would.
Were there times when you went back to headquarters and said, I've learned some things in the field you need to know about?
Oh, yeah, big time. And that was very, I'm a strong believer that in management, very often, it's basic psychology. And you've got to listen to people. And the example that comes to my mind that I mentioned to you before is that, you have decisions taken, by people at headquarters, at face value. They are well-intentioned, but, they just don't make sense from the people's perspective, down in the field. And you've got to be able to bring back that feedback and say, guys, why have you done this? And the example of the maintenance of the pickup trucks, is a good example, and so on. So that's what I was doing in the field. But to come back, the basic question is, you run the railroad, and I run the company. And the company started with the shareholders. And then the stakeholders. And the stakeholders is the local government at local level, the provincial governments, the government in Ottawa, the government in Washington, and so on. And if trend lot, calls, it has to be dealt with effectively, politely, gently, and so on. And therefore, that was my job, and so on. So therefore, and
he didn't want to do that anyway, right?
no, and I don't think that, during the 3 years, 4 years that we were together, I don't think there was maybe one issue where there was a major disagreement. And he said, Paul, you carry the day if this is what you want to do. But apart from that, we're always in the same wavelength, and I respected what he was doing, and he was very, very good. And he was. It's unfortunate, that a guy that competent, having contributed so much to the rail industry, put his job before his family and before his health. Coming, to the office, with a tank of oxygen and so on.
Right, yeah.
One of the first things that he did, was when he came, was to install, screens all around him and so on and so forth, and checking everything, and phoning people at midnight saying, how come the dwell time has doubled, this today, in this yard, and so on. He was just
on top of it.
Unbelievable. So he had that passion, and then horses.
Right. There came a time, though, when his contract was up for renewal and the board didn't renew it. What's the story there, as best you can
Well,
recall?
I was not there. But he had very firm opinions about everything, and there was a disagreement, divergence of opinion on something, and therefore
between him and the board.
Yeah, and he decided to walk away, and yeah. So I cannot say what I cannot take a position on whether the board was right or whether it was, and the decision was taken, and he walked away.
Can you talk a little bit about the decision to acquire Wisconsin Central? That was a big strategic move for you, and you ended up with a company. It's an interesting story, and I think it happened sort of in two chapters. The initial approach, which Wisconsin Central said we're not selling, and then a little later they did. And could you kind of take us through that?
Well,
period?
When you look at the map, it was a logical move on our part, strategically. Moving the stuff, from Chicago to Winnipeg and Winnipeg to Chicago, I was very critical and so on. And it was improving, our efficiency. And they approached us, and we slept on it, and so on. And the final analysis, we decided that it was the right thing to do. And in the aftermath of the acquisition of Illinois Central, we knew more about integration and so on and so forth, and this was done very smoothly. And Ed Burkhardt and so on, was very helpful in doing this transition and so on. And he was a very pleasant guy to do business with, and therefore I think it was beneficial to them and to us, the shareholders, and to us, and so on. So it was a good move, and the integration went very, very well, because, I'm a very strong believer that, people who get together should not be talking acquisition or takeover or what have you. We should try to avoid these words. Mm-hmm. We bring two companies together. one of the first things that we did after the acquisition of CN, we brought, Hunter and I, we said, we'll bring all the people together, all the senior executive, all senior management together. I don't know how many people there were, but, a fair number. We'll bring them to Quebec City. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. We'll stay at the Chateau de Frontenac, which is a landmark hotel in North America.
CP Hotel.
Yes. And, we'll bring the two companies together. It's not we and they, were all together. And it was a good way to kick off the transition. We're very lucky the day we did that. It was a beautiful sunny day. So there was, we had a reception, overlooking the St. Lawrence River. It was beautiful. The guys from IC, were very pleased. Some of them coming from the deep south, did out that, they were walking into 3 feet of snow. It was not exactly the same. It was not exactly the same, and what have you. And we did things, for instance, when I was visiting the troops, one day, and I don't remember where I was, maybe Jackson, Mississippi, and the question was, are you going to change the color of our locomotives? I said, what? Yeah, he said, we like the color of our locomotives. And I said, I don't give a damn, whether, it's the CN color or the IC color. I mean, that's not the purpose of getting together, and so on and so forth. And, you reassure people like this, with something like that.
Your culture's not being destroyed.
So when we're buying a new locomotive, of course there was a CN logo.
Yeah.
But then did we repainted the locomotive, to remove the IC logo? No. And one thing that we are very proud of, they were coming to Montreal and so on and so forth. So we bought every employee a jacket, CN, IC, and so that they could wear it wherever they were working with a removable lining. So therefore, if they were on this side of the border, it was cold, they had a good jacket.
Right.
And then in the south, they could wear it just the same and so on. But these are very, very small things, you know.
But they all count.
Yeah, and there was a guy that, is well known. He was the 2IC to Illinois Central, to Hunter. John Ferguson, I think.
Oh, yeah, became president
of Florida East Coast. And very nice personality. And he was so good at helping us bridge the gap between the two cultures and so on. And my first visit in the Deep South, I think again it was Jackson. It was an important part, for an important place for it. And I spoke to the troops, and then they started questions. And John was there, and he realized that I could not understand at all that Southern drawl. And John was so good. John said, well, Joe, this is a very good question. You see, Mr. Tellier, this guy wants to know, and he was
translating it.
Yeah, and then he went. So he didn't want to stay. I thought that I believe he had a good relationship with Hunter, but I don't know. But he decided not to come, so he left shortly thereafter and had a successful career at the Florida East Coast. And by the way, their trains are beautiful, right? Yeah. When I'm in Florida, I see them going, at the railway crossing. They are really beautiful, right? Blue and yellow and things,
There's actually a book called the Dixie Dictionary to help people understand Southern talk. And the one example that I remember was Lassus is a brown, sweet syrup that you pour on pancakes, and molasses is a second helping of molasses. So
That's interesting. That's interesting. Well, one of the joke here, and the Wall Street Journal called me one day, about this. Here when you make a speech, less so in those days, but more today, you're expecting to say some words in French. So Hunter started a speech here. Bon matin, you all. The lady from the Wall Street Journal called me and she said, "Is it true that he said that?" I said, "Yeah, it is true."
oh boy. Well, there's lots of good stories that come out of our industry, and that's one of them. So there came a time when you decided you were going to retire. And I'm curious about, because you hadn't been here all that long.
10 years.
Yeah, and that's,
10 years for a CEO.
That's, I think the average in the U.S. is 7, so I guess that is longer than.
And now it's getting shorter and shorter.
What was the process coming to the point where you say, okay, I think it's time to step out?
Well, 2 factors. First one is that I'd been on the board of Bombardier, the train and plane maker, for, 3 or 4 years. And the company was going through a very difficult period and needed a turnaround. And the CEO came to see me and he said, "Paul, I would love you to come and, make some changes and turn the company around." And at the same time, I thought it was fair, to move. Hunter, was very familiar with the place. Had heard credibility with the board. We were doing very well. So I accepted the new challenge. And he took over, and it was a smooth transition. Big change in terms of personality and approaches and so on, style, but he was performing and the stockholders were very happy, and as a result, the board was very happy. So I left at the right time. Sabia by then had left.
Oh, yeah.
And by that time, Sabia was running Bell Canada, across the street. And so
he was a tough one to replace, wasn't he?
Yeah, but he had groomed his successor because he had recruited Claude Mongeau, who was an outstanding guy. And the transition between Hunter and Claude went very smoothly. Hunter, basically a railroader in his soul. Claude had learned a lot from Hunter, but more of an economic and financial guy. And it was a good time to make that transition. And Claude did a very, very good job. It was very, very sad when he had to go because it's a very sad personal story. And I have a lot of time for Claude.
How's he doing?
He's doing well, but he lost his voice. Cancer of the vocal cord. So as a result, seated like this, the two of us, there is no problem. You can hear him. But in a big group, it's difficult unless he has a special device. And he came to the conclusion it was better to step down. I was advising him otherwise, and so was Sabia, that he should stay on. But he felt that it could make things difficult, and in the interest of the company, it was better to sit down and
Hunter subsequently went on to CP, which created a bit of a noise. Had you two been in touch? Did you stay in touch?
Yeah, before doing it, he spoke to me. We had a dinner, and I said, listen, there is a big difference between the Canadian culture and the American business culture. And I said, for instance, what's his name? I forget his name, but, left GM to go to Ford and so on and so forth. The guy who really was responsible at Ford to create the Mustang.
Oh, Lee Iacocca.
Yeah, But I said, in Canada, the culture is different. You have devoted a lot of time and energy to make CN a success. For me, as a result of my 10 years in CN, it's in my vein to protect and to make CN the winner, and I wouldn't be able to go and work for CP.
The enemy.
But you want to do it, good for CP, and so on. But we spoke about this, and he decided to go and made it a success, big success.
Took Keith Grill with him.
Yeah, and sometime thereafter, yes. And that was, Keith was doing extremely well here, but decided to go there. And I suppose Keith, assessed that maybe he would have a better chance to take over following Hunter than here. Yeah. Maybe there was a question mark. He was, an outstanding railroader too, having gone to Hunter's School of Business, and so on. So Keith, decided to go.
So when I was little, I grew up at my parents' summer cottage on the Connecticut shore, right next to the New Haven Railroad's main line between New York and Boston. And I used to be fascinated watching trains go by and hauling produce and farm equipment and everything. And I thought, this is just a really neat business. And so I thought, I'm going to go do that. That was not your history. When we interviewed Hayes Watkins always wanted to work for the railroad. He grew up on a farm, but he wanted to be a railroad guy. And the question I have for you is, after being here for 10 years, did it get into your blood? As a lot of railroaders say, it's in my blood. I just love the business. Jim Hagan said that in the interview we did with him. It got in his blood. Did that happen for you, or would you have just been as happy taking on a challenge with Air Canada or BC Hydro or somebody like that? Did you come to love the business?
Yes, a great deal. But given what I did, where I devoted my energy at CN, I never became an expert in railroading. And therefore, I've always deferred to people who knew railroading. I'm a very strong believer that there is nothing worse, there is nothing more dangerous than somebody who doesn't know what he doesn't know.
Right.
And I think that generally I know what I don't know. And therefore, I didn't come here. And I said this to my senior colleagues in the organization when I came on day one. I said, listen, here is what I bring you. One, I know the shareholder is Government of Canada, and I've been working with the shareholder for the last 22 years of my life. So I can contribute this. And two, I have expertise in negotiations. I've negotiated with the Aboriginal people. I've negotiated with the oil and gas industry. I've negotiated with the US, and so on and so forth. So this is what I bring. And I expect you to bring the railroad knowledge. And together, we're going to make this a success. That was my pitch, the first day, and so on. So,
and it worked.
To answer your question, am I a train lover in the sense that, if I'm at the railway crossing and I see a cars and so on, bring back a great memories and so on, and I had a lot of pleasure visiting the troops, track supervisor and so on and so forth in the field, to get on a pickup truck, on the rail, and so on. But I will never pretend that I know the railroad industry the way you do, for instance.
So moving on to Bombardier, you said it was a challenge and so forth. Could you take us through what you found and what you did there, and then why you decided to depart?
Well, the company had grown tremendously. They had become the biggest, the number one rail equipment manufacturer in the world, building everything from railway cars to subways, subway cars to tramways, everything, locomotives, everything. And they had done very well in aerospace, extremely well. In terms of business jets, they were the leader, going from a business jet that sells for, in those days, 8-10 million to 50. So the whole range of products. And then they had taken a business jet, and they had converted this into a commercial aircraft for 50 passengers.
The CRJ.
Yeah, and they stretched this, and that was a major move in the industry, because very often, if you want to go, to various mid-sized cities, this is true in Canada and the US, you have to go to major hub, either, Chicago or New York or what have you, and so on. And these regional aircraft with 50 seats and then 70 seats and then stretch to 90 seats were a major development that was adopted by the industry. But they decided to go into the single aisle, bigger one, and anywhere between 120 and 160 seats. And I came to the conclusion that it wouldn't fly,
so to speak.
Yeah, that Boeing and Airbus would say, no, these guys are not going, this is our bread and butter. We're not going to let these guys, business jet, that's fine. Regional jet, fine. But, in that, these aircraft, the Airbus 320 and so on, no way we're going to let them come and play in our playpen. And so there was a difference of opinion on this. And then it was very difficult for them to live, them being the controlling shareholder, the family, to accept the decision that I had proposed and got approval for, to sell the recreational products division. And it's not because it was not successful. In terms of snowmobile, we had 34% of the market, the equivalent of Yamaha. In terms of, that's in snowmobile. In terms of Sea-Doos, watercraft, again, we're doing extremely well. In terms of ATV, we were not a major players, and in boats, we're not doing well. But, 2 of the 4 products were doing very well, but we needed money. So I took it to the board and we sold it for $1 billion, which was extremely useful on the balance sheet and so on. So that was a tough battle. And then we started to, it was the initial discussions on the C series, which became the Airbus 220. So I was right in the sense that, you know, the development of that plane was had a lot of overrun, billions of dollars overrun. So therefore, when you have an overrun on a product, you have to jack up your price to make money in selling it. And the guy on the other side of the street is watching you and saying, well, I'm going to lower the price of mine. So therefore, Boeing and Airbus, you know, with 320, 319 and so on, and the 737 on the other side, decided to compete in a very aggressive way, and so on. So
And Airbus ultimately bought.
I beg your pardon?
Airbus ultimately bought the airframe business.
Yeah, and there were other mistakes. For instance, you know, Learjet had been bought by Bombardier at the outset. Very good plane, very good plane. And you had a Learjet 35, you had a Learjet 45, you had a Learjet 60. They decided to move and have a Learjet 80, which would have been, I think, 10 passengers. The Lear 60 was 6 passengers. Cost overrun billions of dollars. They had to scrap the project and so on. So it's a sad story. When I was there, Bombardier had, my memory serves me well, 64,000 employees. They are down to 13.
13,000 from 16.
So they are out of rail transportation business, and the aerospace business has shrunk like this. And it's very unfortunate. But, you know, I'm not bitter about the experience. I learned a lot, and I made a contribution, and, you know, we came to a conclusion, to a common decision that was better for me to move on.
So you moved over to Global Container.
Yeah.
As on the board.
Yeah.
And as chairman.
As chairman. Basically, Global Container is a very interesting story. You know, 2 in New York, New Jersey, and 2 in Vancouver. The largest container port in Canada, in Vancouver, Delta Port, and next to the Fraser River. And these 4 companies belonged to a fellow, I forget his name, in Hong Kong. And he was running them in 4 different companies. And this was bought by Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, the 4th largest or 3rd largest pension plan in the country. And the CEO of the pension plan said, Paul, could you come in, put these 4 terminals together under the same roof, Global Container Terminals, plural, and would you set up a board to run this? And of course, the pension plan was, you know, the shareholder. So I was the chair. There was a senior colleague from the pension fund, who was on the board, and together we selected the other directors. And I knew nothing about the business. Very interesting business. Big players, Merckx and, you know, Hapag Lloyd and so on and so forth. Very international and so on. So I learned a lot. But I got there basically to put it together, and I was there for, I think, 7 years.
And were they considered or have a desire to be considered for Prince Rupert when that opened?
Yeah, that was, yes. And but Prince Rupert was not then, you know, what it is today. So therefore, you know, it didn't work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's an illustrious career, and I think the other thing that we didn't really talk about is you have a reputation for being a bit of a fitness person, that you had a discipline of exercise and regimen that you keep up to today, correct?
Yeah, I do. I'm a strong believer. You know, my two kids, my daughter and my son, are first-class athletes. And they would say, Dad, you exercise only on weekends, and you're going to have a heart attack. And I said, that's not true. You know, I exercise almost every day. So from the age of about, 38, 40, I've been keeping a diary only for that purpose. And I write every day that I exercise for a minimum of half an hour. I write it down. Swimming, or tennis, squash, and so on and so forth. And I do the count every month. And then I could do the count at the end of the year. And then I take the diary of the year before and I compare. Was I lazy?
Your operating ratio, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm at 96%. Or...
Yeah. And therefore, I've got no merit. It's part of my system. I've got to exercise. And as we're talking, last night, when you fly to Sydney in Australia from Montreal, and you're 22 hours on a plane, if you don't want to suffer from jet lag, you've got to exercise.
Right.
So
clear your head.
You get in and you put your shorts on and your running shoes and you run for 40 minutes. I was never a runner for an hour and a half, but just and so on. And it's part of the way I live.
Yeah.
And I don't have any merit for this. It's a must. I get up and I do it. And this morning we started early, so I'm going to blame you. If I don't have time before the end of the day to exercise, I'm going to blame you.
I think you should blame Julie as the leader of the pack here. Well, that's all I have. Are there any additional comments or remarks you'd like to make?
No, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I want to thank you. It's been delightful to do this, and thank you for becoming part of the spirit of the Railroaders. And as they say in Hollywood, I guess that's a wrap.